Thank you very much for having me today. And I'm going to start, as I usually start these presentations, by saying sorry. This is my accent. So this is the accent you're going to have for the next 15 minutes. So I'm very sorry about that. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do. I've been really heartened to hear the presentation so far, and I agree wholeheartedly with the speakers and the message that we really need to be speaking about. And I'm going to start today's presentation with a personal anecdote. So whenever my husband and I go to a party and we're meeting new people, he'll always say to me, Claire, if people ask you what you do, don't stand and talk at them for 20 minutes about porn. You're a criminologist, talk about serial killers or something. And I think, okay. So I don't know either A, whether or not I need to change husbands, or B, whether or not that's actually a really important message. And the message is talking about serial killers is actually more palatable than talking about pornography in young people. And I think that is something that we need to enter into this discourse, and we are doing that today. And I think that's so positive, because it is a difficult conversation. It's a confronting conversation. I'm going to tell you stories in this presentation that are going to be confronting. I have a clip that's quite confronting, but we need to enter into those difficult conversations. We can't just take a head in the sand approach. And I know that most of us aren't, and that's fabulous, and I feel that we need to be joined up and a force for greater good. So hopefully today we'll get something good. So what I'm going to talk about today is some ongoing research of mine. So as I say, if you're interested, please get in touch with me, and I would love to hear from you. If you have any comments, suggestions, criticisms, anything, please come at me. In the slides, I have 3 clips. Now, I'm not going to show 3 of them today. I'm going to show 1 of them. I will give a bit of a disclaimer. So it is quite in your face, and the language is quite strong. So if you are of a delicate disposition, I'm really terribly sorry. But I feel the clip is an integral part of the conversation and the presentation. So just be aware of that, please. So I'm going to briefly give you an overview today, and I'm going to cover 5 things. So I'm going to look at pornography. So what is porn and how porn has changed? Porn in the New Zealand media. I'm going to look at pornification and rape culture, which is the context surrounding a lot of the pornography. Some of the unanticipated findings from this research, and I'm going to finish with a discussion on sex and sexuality education in New Zealand. So to give you a bit of an overview, whenever I came to New Zealand and started in my job as a lecturer in criminology, I was funded to look at young people, young New Zealanders and their digital lives. So the impetus for this was my background is actually in drugs and drug education, and there was a gap in research around sexting, and I was asked, okay, will you put forward a funding proposal and please try and address this gap? So I said, yeah, that sounds really good. So I started off by asking stakeholders, okay, well, what are the issues for you with young people in their digital lives? So some of the broad themes that come out of it were sexting pornography, revenge pornography, or better known as image-based sexual abuse, and education and awareness around it. There were other things like grooming and child abuse material and things like that unfortunately this study just didn't have the scope to cover. So I've looked at sexting and I've looked at pornography, and I'm looking at them together but also distinctly. So I'm not looking at pornography as self-made, sexting as self-made pornography. And how this happened was I was going into schools and saying, okay, well, let's start a conversation around sexting. And the people I was talking to were saying, yes, definitely, but we also need to talk about porn. Porn's so important. So pornography was part of it as well. This research isn't without its challenges. And as with any research, there are kind of issues that we need to be reflexive about. Personally, I believe neutrality is a legend. It's an urban myth. But it's something that I've tried really hard to stand behind for this research. And one of the reasons for that is I want to be as balanced as possible. I want to be a blank slate for young people so they feel they can tell me how they feel about pornography, how they feel we're dealing with pornography, etc. I have, on 2 occasions, been pigeonholed as pro-porn. I don't think it's as simplistic as pro-porn and anti-porn. I think it's a nuanced debate and there's lots of grey areas. And I have become known as the porn lady in New Zealand, so that's interesting. So sorry, I'll just get some water. These sexy bad boys, as you can see, were the first type of pornography that we know of. So the terracotta moulding is about 4,000 years old, and it was considered pornography in its day. Now, if we think about, well, what exactly is pornography? So largely, printed or visual material containing explicit description or a display of sexual organs or activity intended to stimulate sexual excitement. So that's a very general, so this was porn. In terms of graphic details, and as was outlined in the presentation before this, so we know that 30% of all internet bandwidth is used for porn. We know that 70% of men and 30% of women watch porn according to Pornhub, although that's now increased. And the average time spent on a porn site is 12 minutes, so read into that as you will. We know that porn has obviously changed through the ages. So if we think about porn today, we think about kind of porn in the 70s and porn as it is now. So what's our interest and what's our fascination with porn? And I feel part of it's morbid curiosity, but it's also, it's excitement, it's pleasurable, it's something that a lot of our young people are looking at. And the issue is that it's becoming, as porn is becoming more and more popular, it's a more and more competitive market. So porn is becoming more and more aggressive to find its niche within that competitive market. And as was pointed out in the presentation before mine, that most of this aggression, 94% of this aggression, is directed towards women. So in terms of youth and porn, so what do we know? Well, looking at some research that took place last year in the UK, we know that more boys view online porn through choice than girls. We know that according to this NSPCC report, at 11, the majority of children had not seen online pornography, although, again, speaking to sex therapists and other people in New Zealand, I think that's quite a conservative estimate. We know that young people on first viewing pornography are usually shocked. They report a mixture of emotions, so curiosity, shock, and confusion. But the more they watch it, the more they tend to like it. I know one of the schools that I've been working with, they had a 12-year-old boy who was caught trying to access 282 blocked porn sites in one afternoon. Now, I think that's dedication, if nothing else. But whenever they spoke to his parents, they alluded to he had quite a sheltered upbringing. He was using it as sex education. He had met a girl, they got together, and then he found something he liked, so he was trying. And the same issue was happening at home, where he was watching a lot of porn at home. We know that some older children want to act out the pornography that they've seen, so they want to emulate, and we're getting increased reports, again, of anal sex, lack of protection, girls masturbating with objects that aren't suitable, either in terms of size or hygienic. We know that there's a lot of coercion, particularly around anal sex. Some of the research that I've carried out, one of the participants said, you know, I told her it slipped. And this is very, very normalised. So there are increasing risks around sexual activity and young people. Now again, stepping into my neutrality role, I think it's important that we look at, okay, well, why are young people engaging with pornography, and are there any benefits? And I think, yeah, there are. You know, if we look at marginalised youth or same-sex attracted youth that are maybe getting a very heteronormative sex and sexuality education, that porn is quite an important part of their lives. One person I spoke to told me about a client of hers who was disabled. He felt that he couldn't get a girlfriend, so he was getting intimacy from pornography. There was a sense of connectedness there. So I feel that, and I'll come back to this whenever I talk about sex and sexuality education, that we can't totally deny the pleasure principle either. We need to look at it from both sides. One of the biggest problems with pornography is context, or lack of context. So with this wanting to emulate what they have seen online, but also thinking that this is quite realistic. So this is, you know, what couples do. And we know even from data that young girls are going and removing their pubic hair at a much, much earlier age than happened before. The young person, another example is two young people, 13 years old, in another school I was in, were caught trying to have sex in the bathroom. And the school counsellor separated them and had a very progressive conversation with them and was asking things like, were you going to use a condom, blah, blah, blah. And their response was, no, we were just going to have anal sex because she couldn't have got pregnant anyway. So that's obviously quite confronting. Now, I feel that with all of the information we have, we find it quite difficult to navigate. But again, for a young person, it's even more difficult to navigate. Add on top of this, pornography in the media in such a sensationalist, headline-grabbing way. I think there are numerous issues with this, but one of them is definitely surveillance culture. So we're wanting our young people not to watch porn, so we're applying spyware to the phones, we're looking at what they're doing, we're looking at the internet history, but there's not a lot of conversation going on around that. And then you have pornification. So we live in a pornified society. If you look at music videos, if you look at billboard advertisements, they're very sexualized, they're very pornified, it's very normalized. Now, the clip that I told you about, the first clip there is a clip that you've most likely all seen, the song Blurred Lines, which I'm not going to play for you, but it's there if you want to see it. On the other side, I have a clip of a couple of young women from Auckland University Law School. I had nothing to do with this. They came together and they engaged with the discourse and they took hold. So I would like you to watch the clip. It's about 3 minutes long, and then I'll finish up. Could we have the second one, please? Thank you. Apologies, it is pretty in your face. Will it not? If it doesn't play, don't worry. So the clip is online. It's called Defined Lines. And it's, as I say, a group of women taking ownership of this very misogynistic song. So if we think about pornification and we think about the mixed messages that we're giving young people, I think some of our young people are taking hold of this discourse and entering into it. Again, certain groups of young people, so these are law students at Auckland University, but also, oh, I'm off. Hey, I'm on again. Also, in terms of rape culture, and this is something that we really, again, context. I'm all about the context. If we're watching or engaging with porn in a context of rape culture. But again, it's something, if we look at the Wellington College high school incident, and there were young girls protesting, and I think sometimes that we underestimate what they can do, so I think we really need to be facilitating that. So, very quickly, 2 unanticipated findings. The first one was young women, young heterosexual identifying women, who watch lesbian porn and were freaking out about what they were watching. And they're 2 minutes, okay, I can go fast. Their distress was palpable. And again, if we think about the slides we saw earlier with same-sex attracted youth and mental health issues and bullying in schools, this is definitely something that we need to be addressing. The other issue that I found was young people who, I was looking at youth-focused online helplines, and young religious identifying youth who were watching pornography and self-reporting pornography addiction. Now, again, if we think about pornography addiction, we could, oh, I'm off again. Hey, we could argue until the cows come home, pornography addiction, is it actually a thing? How does it fit into the DSM-5, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? But I think what got it for me was the distress that these young people were feeling was palpable. And we need to be engaging with them. And it doesn't matter how we feel about porn addiction, but it's the distress of the young people that's the most important. So how do we do all of this? Again, on this slide, if you have a look, there's a John Oliver clip. I quite fancy John Oliver, so that's why he's there. But it's thinking about, should we try and ban pornography? Well, I think that's really, really unrealistic. Limiting access, so putting filters. A lot of the young people I've spoken to are very internet savvy, they can get round filters. So how do we address the issues of consent? And again, the presentation before mine looked at the issues of consent and coercion and how consent has changed and agency behind it. It's a very gendered perspective. There's victim blaming rhetoric. We need new strategies. I think some of us are doing that really, really well. Some of the schools I've been in are doing that really well, but others not so much. And again, we need this joined up approach. And harm reduction, I think the Australian study that was quoted said 100% of boys were watching porn. So we need to be realistic, and we need to, it's not time for abstinence, it's time for harm reduction. And I think that that's really, really important. Thank you very much.